I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine that you are manning a cannon. And obviously, you are firing cannonballs at the other side. And the other side is firing cannonballs back at you. Okay? Not an ideal situation, obviously. A little bit frightening. Only you see their cannons go off one day, and you're thinking, uh-oh, I better take cover. There's a cannonball coming my way. Only after you duck down, you hear the cannonball land, and it doesn't sound like the other cannonballs at all. In fact, it made a kind of funny splat. So you poke your head up to see what the problem is, and you find out they didn't fire a cannonball this time. They fired your best friend's head at you. We are about to talk about one of the nastiest sieges and most important sieges in human history. Honestly, you can say this siege probably affects the world we live in today, and the world we live in today possibly would have been radically different. What time period are we in? Now, the Siege of Malta is in the 1500s, and I'm about to give a bunch of background on the two different sides, so just hang with me for a moment. But it's important to understand just some basics about the technology in the world we live in the 1500s. All right, so this is post Christopher Columbus. You got that, 1492 and all that. This is the era where they still have sailing ships. Ships still have sails in them, so there's no engines and things like that. But it's not all bows and arrows and swords. However, there are crossbows, bows and arrows, and swords, and they are employed a lot on the battlefield. There are cannons, as I just pointed out. Every major country will have cannons at their disposal, and they have, I'm going to call them guns, muskets, old single shot things, but they are the most basic thing you have ever seen. Gigantic, heavy, cumbersome, not very accurate at all. You're not going to square up against a guy who's 200 yards away and have a snowball's chance in you-know-where of hitting him with these things. So yes, gunpowder and shot and those things, they do matter. It is important, but I wanted you to understand we're still talking swords here, okay? Swords, cannons, old guns. Now, before we get to Malta, I'm going to talk about two different sides. Jerusalem. We're going to go way back. This is about the year 1000. In fact, very close to being exactly 1,000 years ago. Jerusalem. You are well aware, Jerusalem is considered a holy land for the three largest religions on the planet: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. That is the case today. If you go to Jerusalem today, you will see all three represented there, and it was very much the case back in this era. And the Muslims and the Christians both have laid claim to it. They want it to be theirs, and they're fighting over it. This is the era of what is known as the Crusades. I'm not going to do a bunch of Crusades history, but you've heard of a pilgrimage, right? You at least understand what a pilgrimage is. Christians at this time will make pilgrimages in the same way you would do today. I guess you could argue what we did as a show a couple years ago was a pilgrimage. You are going to visit the holy sites of what you believe. Muslims make pilgrimages there as well. Christians would make pilgrimages to Jerusalem. While there, and remember, there's all kinds of fighting going on and ugly things. An order has been started. What is an order exactly? I want you to think of the Knights of Columbus. You've heard of the Knights of Columbus. My father-in-law is a member of the Knights of Columbus. What do? Well, they serve the community in various ways. They'll give back. They do fish fries. It's an order. Orders were a little different back then. Now, they did a lot of that as well, but they could be orders of service. They could be military orders. An order begins in Jerusalem in the year 1000, and it is known as the Knights of St. John, or the Knights Hospitaller, or the Knights Hospitaller, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I'm going to tell you right now, I picked the one that I thought was the coolest sounding, and so it's the one I'm sticking with. The Knights of St. John is the one I'm sticking with, but Knights Hospitaller or Hospitaller is a very, very common way. It's an order. It was not a military order when it began. You know the name Hospitaller, Hospitaller, depending on your accent. It was a hospital. They started a hospital in Jerusalem. They did not only treat Christians or Jews or Muslims. All were welcome. They started a hospital there. Hospitals, we are used to hospitals being everywhere today. Even if you're in a rural area, there are hospitals 20, 30 minutes from you. If you're in an urban area, you're probably 10 minutes from a hospital. That is not the case in the ancient world. They started a hospital to care for the sick. But like I said, this was an era where there was quite a bit of, it still is, but there was quite a bit of controversy over this chunk of ground, holy to the Muslims, holy to the Christians. The Jews they're not going to play a major role in our story here, so we're going to set them aside right now. And they were fighting over it. The Christians and the Muslims were fighting over it. And if you were a Christian making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, remember, you're not flying in on United. You have to walk, ride a horse, ride a camel, and it was a dangerous affair. The Knights of St. John, or Knights Hospitaller, they start a hospital in Jerusalem around the year 1000, but Christians making the pilgrimage to Jerusalem at this time, they kept getting attacked. Attacked by robbers, attacked by Muslims. It was a problem. So the Knights, and I should pause real quick. Jewish producer Chris said something during the break about the Knights Templar. Those are very famous. This is not them. This is not them. I wasn't insulting you, Chris, but a lot of people would think, are these the same knights? The Knights of St. John were a Catholic order, very similar to the Knights Templar. These are not them. This is a separate group. All right. So they expand, and they go from being just a hospital, just giving medical care, to a military order. Now, they are a strict military order. They are funded by various sources, and they are well-trained, very, very good fighters. Eventually, during those crusades, the Muslims are led by a man named Saladin. If you are a history buff at all, know anything about the Crusades, you will have heard of the name Saladin. Saladin was a famous Muslim general, very, very talented, and he won. It became his, and after he won, he took this military order of knights and he kicked them out. He kicked them out to a place called Rhodes. Now, we're going to pause for just a moment. The Knights of St. John are on a place called Rhodes. In case you're wondering where this is important for our story. Like I said, there's going to be a lot more background and location here to try to explain who's who and what's what and where we are. And I know you're listening, not looking at it. So the Mediterranean, you know about the Mediterranean. You are at least aware of it. That's where Greece and Italy and all the southern France, southern Spain, that's where all those things are. But Italy, southern Spain, southern France, that is the Western Mediterranean. The Eastern Mediterranean is Greece, and this is where Turkey is located. All right, so that's the Eastern Mediterranean. The Mediterranean has always, since boats have gotten onto the water, the Mediterranean has been prized choice territory. You want the Mediterranean to ship goods and men, and you want to be able to ship things to and fro. The Mediterranean is prime real estate, and it is still prime real estate to this day. You want to be able to own the waves, own the shores on those waves. By the way, I should note, Northern Africa this is all part of the Mediterranean. Now that brings us to the Ottoman Empire. I'm not going to go into the whole background on the Ottoman Empire. We've done a bit of them before, and we'll probably do a bit of them again because they're a fascinating, powerful empire. They rose up and they began to conquer the world around them. Very, very powerful, very, very smart, science heavy, really sharp empire that was run in a really sharp way. And they're Muslim. What was Europe? Europe was Catholic/Christian. Honestly, during the era we're in, that's when Protestantism and the Catholics were starting to kill each other. We're not going to go into any of that. I'm going to dumb this down and just say Europe was Catholic at this time, okay? Europe's Catholic. Europe's Christian or whatever. The Ottomans are Muslim. That may mean nothing to you. Maybe you have no belief system or whatever, but that is not at all important to our story. What is important to our story is it meant everything to both sides. For the Ottomans, as they rose up and they began to conquer really the Muslim world, they were conquering much of the Muslim world, pulling them under the Ottoman umbrella. They were selling themselves and viewed themselves as, we are the protectors of Islam. We are the ones who will spread Islam. We will protect the people of Islam. And for a very, very, very long time, the Ottomans saw themselves that way, and many people in the Islamic world saw themselves that way. Now, as the Ottoman Empire, this Islamic empire was rising, Christian Europe, Catholic Europe, was afraid. And understandably so. It wasn't an ungrounded fear. The Ottoman Empire was spreading and conquering and spreading and conquering. And there was an event which we've done before. I'm not going to go into it. The Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, depending, they would have called themselves Roman. They had Constantinople. It was really the center of Christianity at the time. And in the 1400s, the Ottoman Empire took the center of Christianity at this time. Whatever your belief system is, I want you to picture what you consider to be maybe your most holy or cherished place. Imagine it falling to what you consider to be your religious mortal enemy. The fall of Constantinople rocked and brought a whole lot of fear into Christian Europe. These Muslims, are they going to come kill us all? Are they gonna come bring Islam and force it into all of Europe? They're so powerful. How do we stop them? So this happened in the 1400s. Now, something else had happened then. Remember I said the Knights of St. John were sent to Rhodes? The Knights of St. John get kicked out of Jerusalem when the Muslims conquer it, and they get sent to Rhodes. But they don't just sit around on Rhodes. They fortify Rhodes. Now, here's the important part. I just talked about the Ottoman Empire expanding and growing and expanding and growing. They are in the Eastern Mediterranean at this time. Rhodes is over there in Greece, in the Eastern Mediterranean. They attack Rhodes. The Ottoman Empire does. The Knights of St. John were not chumps, as we will continue to find out. They were hard as nails. And for them, this was a deeply religious conflict. They saw themselves as being the protectors of Christendom, the protectors of the Catholic Church, the protectors of people who believe in Jesus. In the same way, the Ottomans saw themselves as, the sword of Islam, all those things. They attacked Rhodes. The Knights fight so valiantly that the big cheese of the Ottoman Empire says, hey, by the way, his name's Suleiman. I probably should go ahead and name him. I try not to give you too many details and names, but Suleiman the Magnificent. I'm sure he nicknamed himself. Suleiman the He does not wipe them all out when he defeats them at Rhodes. He says, you guys fought like lions. I respect that, so you may go. He grants them clemency and safe passage for their bravery. So anyone he hadn't already killed, he says, you can go. Well, now you have the Knights of St. John, this religious order, and they don't have a home. So they are given a home by Christian Europe. Their home is a place known as Malta. Where is Malta? Here's where it is. I told you there's an Eastern Mediterranean and a Western Mediterranean. Don't worry if you don't have it memorized. It's not important. There's an Eastern half and there's a Western half. Italy, that boot that comes down? And then there's that huge island, Sicily, that's right off the toe of that boot, right to the west of that boot. Right below Sicily, there is a, frankly, pretty desolate, crappy piece of rock called Malta. So when the Knights of St. John were given Malta, you should understand a couple things. This was not exactly a luxurious post, but they were people without a home at this time. And there were Maltese people on Malta who weren't necessarily given a choice in this whole thing. The Knights were given this place, and the Knights stepped in, and they made it their home. Now, I already told you the Ottomans were expanding. They were coming east, they were coming west towards Europe. They were moving from the east to the west. They were already taking over places like Hungary. Christian Europe is not only divided in fighting itself, they are deathly afraid of the Ottomans who are coming. The Ottomans, as they seize more and more control of the Mediterranean, they are taking over. I already told you how important the Mediterranean is today and was in yesteryear. They are taking over valuable sea lanes, and they're now getting stupid wealthy, shipping goods and services back and forth across the Mediterranean. So, you're a knight. You're in Malta. What do? Well, you're on an island. You're there to protect Europe. The Muslims are your sworn enemy. You need to build up the fortifications of the island and then get your butt on a boat, and you need to go make life very, very miserable for the Ottomans. And they do. The Knights, essentially, they called them corsairs. You've ever heard that term, corsair? Corsair? You know what a corsair is? It's a pirate. It's a pirate when you don't want to call somebody a pirate. The Knights sail forth, and they start creating nightmares for the Ottomans. Raiding ships, raiding goods, kidnapping people. They are stealing, essentially. Stealing. Now, I already said Suleiman the Magnificent, big cheese of the Ottoman Empire, he had previously let the Ottomans go. He had previously let the Knights of St. John go. He had given them clemency. He was displeased, to put it mildly, to find out that the Knights of St. John, who he had let go, were now raiding his ships and making his life miserable. He thought that was completely out of line, and frankly, he probably has a pretty good point, but that's not important. What is important is this. Suleiman not only goes down to northern Africa and takes over the portion of northern Africa the Knights had, word gets back to the Knights. You see, every era is an era of intelligence gathering and spying. I already said the Ottoman Empire had taken over Constantinople. It's known today as Istanbul. They had taken over Constantinople. That was the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Word got back to the Knights on Malta that Suleiman the Magnificent was building a large fleet. The Knights, it didn't exactly take a genius to figure out what he was planning on doing with that fleet. They figured out he was coming. And they knew it was going to be large. They knew that he was going to be coming to take Malta from them. So Now I have to do something. And I'm probably going to have to do this a couple times, but I try to make sure you can visualize what we're dealing with here. And this is probably the most complicated thing I will ever have you visualize, so I'm going to simplify it, okay? You know what Pac-Man looks like? Everybody knows what Pac-Man looks like. You got it, Pac-Man. If you don't know what Pac-Man looks like, I can't help you, okay? Pac-Man. I want you to picture Pac-Man, and his mouth is open to the right, all right? His mouth is open to the right. For simplicity purposes, this is going to be our Malta, okay? You have your Pac-Man pictured in your head? Now, Pac-Man, on his lower jaw, towards the back of his lower jaw, he has 2 teeth. They're close to each other. They're both coming out of his lower jaw. He has 2 teeth. You with me? There are 4 locations that are going to matter for the Siege of Malta. The Siege of Malta is not one gigantic fortress. It's a big, desolate, crappy island. It is 4 locations. There is one. Don't worry about memorizing all this. I'll keep covering it again. There's one on Pac-Man's nose, up by where his nose would be. This is going to be the site of a lot of nastiness. This is called the Fort of St. Elmo. Don't worry about memorizing the names. The teeth, down to the teeth. The teeth have names, which we'll get to. That's not important. I'll get to those in a little bit. Now, the 4th location is his tonsils. Way back in the back of his mouth. And again, I'm making this very simple. Emdina is what it's called. So you have his nose, 2 teeth, and his tonsils. Those are the 4 locations of the 4 fortifications on Malta. And the Ottomans are coming. And there's a lot of them. And the knights have to get ready. That was a little bit of the background. The Knights of St. John are digging in on Malta. They know the Ottoman Empire is coming with a massive invasion fleet. And so they begin to fortify the island. The 4 locations I already discussed. Just for your reference, in case you're interested, it is the Fort St. Elmo, Sanglia, Burgo, and Emdina. Don't worry about those 4 locations. Don't worry about the names. Just know there are 4 locations. For now, we're going to focus on a couple different things. How are they planning on fighting this? What are the Ottomans bringing? First, the Knights of St. John on Malta, they understand there's very little chance for them to win without help. Now, I already said it was not a unified place then. It's not a unified place now. But back then, it was really, really not unified. The Knights were sending out essentially help wanted letters. They were reaching out to the Pope. They were reaching out to kings. Hey, I need troops. I need help. I need boats. The Ottomans are coming. The Muslims are coming. Help. Please send help. They are not getting rejected, I should clarify, but everyone they're asking for help from, they're most definitely dragging their feet. Oh, hey, you need some help? Yeah, well, I got to move some things around. We'll get on that at some point in time. Keep in mind, they're desperate. They need help now. What kind of numbers are we talking about here? About 700 knights. That number will be disputed no matter what source you read, but traditionally it's thought to be about 700 knights. There are some civilians on the island, as I pointed out, and there are some other troops, a few thousand, who aren't knights. Remember, the Siege of Malta is normally, it's sold as 700 knights versus 30,000 Ottomans. The knights had some help. But the knights were most definitely the biggest, strongest, toughest. They were the leaders of this whole thing. So that's what they had. Now, I gave the game away a little. 30,000 Ottomans. They're crossing the sea. They have these gigantic galleys. Picture this. A galley is a big ship. 800 people on one ship. Even if you picture old sailing ships as large, that's amazingly large. They not only have sails, they have oars. Who mans the oars? Slaves. Remember, slavery, I know your history professor told you that America was the only country that ever participated in it. No, it has always existed, will always exist. It exists to this day as well. And some of the worst slavery I've ever read about are galley slaves. You are down in the bowels of a ship. It is nasty. It is smelly. Disease is everywhere. The work is absolutely brutal. So anyway, these huge ships are coming across the ocean. There are 2 different commanders on this ship. Before they even get to Malta, they are fighting with each other. They end up in a nice little squabble. Generals have egos too, so that's already a problem. But shouldn't be a big issue, right? Because they obviously outnumber the knights. There aren't that many of them. In case you're wondering, pause. What were they arguing about? Well, they argued about a lot, but one of the main things they were arguing about is, okay, we have these 4 locations on Malta. We have Pac-Man's nose, his tonsils, and the 2 teeth in his bottom jaw. What do we attack first? The guy who was in charge, the guy who won the argument, he wanted to attack Fort St. Elmo. He wanted to attack Pac-Man's nose. So they show up, they land their ships on there, and they start bombarding this fort. Now, maybe you think this fort is completely impregnable. Nothing could be further from the truth. This fort is not impressive at all. It is not. It is a fort, and the knights have known they are coming, so they're building it up. But this is not some gigantic, impregnable fortress. The Ottomans land right around Pac-Man's, I'd say his forehead. They land their boats. They land their troops. They put all their cannons out there, and they start firing their cannons at Fort St. Elmo. While the cannons are firing, they are digging trenches. In case you're wondering, historically, this is one of the most common ways to take a fortified city. Not just tunnels, but trenches. How does this work? Here's an example of how trenches work. You obviously cannot just get in the ground with a shovel and start digging in a straight line towards a fort, because then they're going to take their cannons and their guns, and they're just going to shoot it down the trench and murder everybody. So you have to zigzag back and forth, essentially keeping the trench always as a wall between you and the guns that are on the fortification. Well, right away, we are seeing a problem the Ottomans are going to have. I already pointed out that Malta is crappy. It's windswept. It's a rock. We're not talking about a lush place. Before the Ottomans got there, the man in charge of the knights, it's the last name I'm going to give you, De Valette is his name. He is the top knight, De Valette. Yes, in case you're wondering, he is French. Don't hold that against him. De Valette, the man in charge of the knights, he goes and he finds all the houses, all the food, all the livestock around Malta, and he burns down the houses, takes down everything, takes the food, and brings all the stuff inside of the fortifications. A 30,000-man army from the Ottomans lands, and there's nothing for them to find to eat. They have to bring it all with them. And the Ottomans, having let the Knights of St. John go once before, have had enough of their raiding and pillaging in the Mediterranean, and they land a 30,000-man force on Malta, and they began to assault Fort number 1. It's called Fort St. Elmo. Now, in this Fort St. Elmo, there's roughly 1,000 men. They are not all knights, trained, born and bred warriors at all. There are some knights. There are some other soldiers, so they're not all completely, untrained. And then there are civilians inside of the Fort St. Elmo. Now let's talk about the Ottoman forces. They have cannons, obviously. So both sides have cannons. This is the era of cannons and muskets. The Ottomans not only have cannons, they have a bunch of regular troops, and they also have elite troops. Think about them like this is their special forces types. They're called Janissaries. If you know anything about the Ottoman Empire, you will know for a very long time they have had tip-of-the-spear troops called Janissaries. Now, I want to pause for a second because this will apply to way more than this story. This applies to any military engagement you ever read about or learn about. We obsess over numbers. They have so many thousand here, and he has 50,000, and they have 20,000, and they have 100,000, and they have but all troops are not the same. Not at all. There are widely different levels of training and experience and equipment. Just because there are 30,000 Ottomans and only 700 knights on the island does not mean there are 30,000 trained, equipped, capable Ottomans who are lions on the battlefield. It does not mean that at all. The Janissaries, however, are trained, equipped lions, highly experienced. And there's not that many of them because you can't make that many of them here. The numbers I read differed wildly. A lot of people say there are in total about 6,000 of the 30,000 Ottomans were Janissaries. That number doesn't matter. These little details are not important. Just know there are only so many of them. And then when they're gone, when they're dead, you're back to fairly pedestrian regular troops. And on the other side as well, we said there are 700 knights. Some people say 500. Again, details don't matter. But there are other regular troops. Some, not many, but some. But they're not knights. They're not guys who live and die for this. Now, Fort St. Elmo, I used Pac-Man as an example last night to try to explain the geography of what you're looking at here. And in Pac-Man's mouth, obviously, is water. It's a great harbor. But Pac-Man's nose is Fort St. Elmo. It is not some impregnable fortress. The knights did know they were coming, and they did build up the fortifications, but it is not an impregnable fortress. The Ottomans, they get their cannons down, and as I pointed out last night, they began to dig trenches towards the fort. Trenches are not built in a straight line, remember? You have to zigzag in order to give your troops cover as they inch their way towards the wall. I mentioned earlier, this is a rocky, miserable island. And right now it's hot. This island is south of Sicily. We're in the month of July. It's hot. Here's the unsexy part of so many battles. Water. You have to have it. This is hard work. Think about the daily life of the Ottoman soldier or slave. They had many slaves, as I pointed out. You are chipping and chopping away at rock. You need food and you need water. Even if you don't care about the lives of your slaves, and that's oftentimes how slaves are treated, you still don't want them to die. You need them digging. You have to feed them. You have to give them water. And it's an island surrounded by salt water, and there's not much water on the island. And guess what else? I didn't tell you this last night. There are sources of fresh water on the island, wells. Do you know what the Knights did? What Dave Alette, he's the leader of the Knights, do you know what he did before the Ottomans got there? He took dead animals and dropped them into all the freshwater sources that were outside of the fort. Obviously, as you've just figured out, now that water is rotten, your men can't touch it or your men will get sick and die. It is a race against time. Every single siege always is a race against time for both sides. The people inside only have so much water, only have so much ammo, only have so much food. The people outside only have so much water, only have so much ammo, only have so much food. The Ottomans start chopping away and chipping away with these trenches, inching closer and closer and closer to Fort St. Elmo. But sieges are not always static things. This is a talk we have about politics all the time. You can't just hide behind your walls. If they're pounding on your walls or almost ready to start pounding on your walls, you are going to have to sally forth. You are going to have to leave your walls and go try to fight them off, keep them off of the walls. And they are doing this. They're riding out from St. Elmo when they can, usually at night. They're trying to kill as many Ottomans. They're attacking the trenches, as you can imagine. So you have those trench workers. Think what terrible luck this would be. You get stuck on trench duty. You're hot, you're thirsty, you're tired, your back hurts. You're chopping away at rock all day, and you look up in time to see a knight riding down on you, shoving a sword into your face. It is up close, it is personal, and it is a war of hatred. But the lines continue to get closer and closer to Fort St. Elmo. Now, the cannons have gotten close enough to Fort St. Elmo. They start knocking the walls down. But here's the problem. They're hitting the top of the walls, and they are knocking the mid to top of the walls down. But you can't send your troops over if it's just the top of the walls down. You are going to have to send troops into the walls. You've got to attack the foundation. Now along comes one of the real, allegedly great leaders of the Ottomans. Dragut is his name. Don't worry about remembering that. His nickname stands for, tell me how cool this is, the Drawn Sword of Islam. That's kind of cool, right? You got to be honest. That's kind of cool. And I know no one's rooting for the Ottomans right now, but that's kind of a cool nickname. Dragut notices the cannons are not firing right. He's a hands-on type. You don't earn the nickname Drawn Sword of Islam because you sit on your hands. And so he charges up to the Ottoman lines to say, hey, idiots, lower the cannons. We have to hit the we have to hit the bottom of the walls to drop it. Good for Dragut. But there is a reason many militaries don't send their commanders out like this. Dragut catches a bullet in the back. Allegedly, no one will ever know for sure, from his own troops. By the way, some people say the head, some people say the back. It was an accident, Chris. It was an accident. He goes back to his lines, mortally wounded, and dies 5 days later. Now you have a morale problem for the Ottomans. So the Ottomans are inching closer to Fort St. Elmo, Pac-Man's nose, right? And I already mentioned his mouth is full of water. It's the Great Harbor. And I told you last night that you need to picture two teeth coming out the bottom part of his jaw, towards the back of his jaw. Those are peninsulas controlled by the knights, fortified peninsulas. The reason I bring this up is this. Maybe you've been wondering, if you're the Ottomans, you have all these ships with cannons and things like that on them. Why don't you just sail the ships into the Great Harbor and start shooting at Fort St. Elmo from the other side? Well, remember, the knights have cannons too, and those two teeth, which we will get to, there's fortifications on there. You can't just sail your ships into the Great Harbor and start firing at Fort St. Elmo, because then those two teeth are going to start firing their cannons at your ships. Here's a little foreshadowing, which is going to happen anyway, and you are going to lose your ships. Keep this in mind. The Ottomans are not home. The Ottomans are a long way from home. They are currently south of what is now Sicily. They have to, when this is over, get all the way back to what is now Istanbul. That's a long sail, and you need boats. So they have to keep inching their way towards Fort St. Elmo. Now, they do. It is a hard, brutal slog, but they finally find themselves at the walls of Fort St. Elmo. They start knocking holes in the walls of Fort St. Elmo. Big ones. Walls their troops can pour through. In fact, not only can their troops pour through them, they're knocking down outer walls, and they're bringing their cannons up and now shooting cannons practically point blank at the inner walls. What's happening inside of Fort St. Elmo? Couple different things. They are charging forward whenever there is a gap in the wall, and there is brutal, vicious, hand-to-hand, sword and spear combat where bodies are stacking up inside of the gaps. When they are not in the gaps, at night, I told you there were civilians inside of Fort St. Elmo. Everybody, including the civilians, they're grabbing mattresses, curtains, whatever you can grab to throw it in the gap that was just created for when the Ottomans come back the next day. And know this, everybody by now, everyone in the fort, both sides, they know Fort St. Elmo is going to fall. At this point in time, the knights, they send somebody across the harbor to Dave Alet. In fact, Dave Alet sent someone to them too. Dave Alet sends someone to them, the knights across the harbor, and they say, hey, we can't hold this fort anymore. Can we abandon it now? Can we abandon it and come to the other? Can we come down to the teeth? Can we come down to the other fortifications? Dave Alet tells them, no, you have to stay. Why? Was he just a jerk? He may have been a jerk. I don't know. But every day the Ottomans were being occupied with taking Fort St. Elmo. The fortifications on the two teeth were getting bigger and stronger and better. Bigger and stronger and better. And Dave Alet needed Fort St. Elmo to hold out as long as humanly possible. He essentially ordered them to die. Now, the fighting continues, and it's bad, and it's ugly, and people are dying on both sides. Eventually, Fort St. Elmo does fall. This was something the Ottomans needed to happen in a few days. It took them a month to take what should have been a few days. You're running out of food, you're running out of water, and more importantly, remember those Janissaries I brought up, the Ottoman elite troops? You took one of the forts and you lost half your Janissaries. By the time it's done, the Ottomans have lost roughly 6,000 of their men, and the knights have lost about 1,000 out of about the 3,000 they have. Yes, they lost Fort St. Elmo, the knights did. It was unbelievably costly for the Ottomans. You can argue, I would disagree, but you can argue, as of this point right now, the Ottomans have already lost the Siege of Malta. They lost too many of their elite troops. They lost too much time, too much food, too much water, too many cannonballs. You should probably pack it up and head out. That's not an option. As you can probably imagine, if you're an Ottoman commander, you really don't want to cruise on back across the ocean and tell Suleiman the Magnificent that your 30,000 troop expedition is a huge failure and you were unable to dislodge those pesky Christians. That's a good way to find your head on a spike. So now that you have Fort St. Elmo, you have to go take the two teeth. Sanglia and Burgo. That's what we're going to call them. Sanglia and Burgo. They have forts on them that are called, we're just going to make it simple. Sanglia and Burgo. The Ottomans have taken Fort St. Elmo. Remember, I told you in the beginning there were 4 fortified locations on this island. Number 1 is gone. Now they have to worry about the teeth. I told you this island, you need to picture it like Pac-Man. In the mouth is the great harbor, and Pac-Man has 2 gigantic teeth in his bottom jaw. These are peninsulas that jut out into the great harbor, and they are fortified. There are civilians here. There are essentially the rest of the knights here. They have been building fortifications and preparing for a long time for these Ottomans to come. Remember, I said before, if you're the Ottomans, you can't just sail your boats right into the harbor because the fortifications are going to blow your boats out of the water. But if you're the Ottomans, you understand your boats are a force multiplier. They can carry troops. They have cannons on them. You need your boats into the tonsils, essentially. You need to get your boats into the harbor, but you can't bring them in through the mouth. What to do? What to do? Well, this is something the Ottomans have done before. History nerds will know this. It's part of what they did at the Siege of Constantinople. The Ottomans were wonderful engineers, and they were really great at combat. They figured out how to haul gigantic boats over the land, and they do. Picture how unbelievably labor-intensive it would be to no construction equipment, right? There's no engine. They hauled their boats, essentially Pac-Man's forehead. They hauled it down over Pac-Man's forehead and landed their boats back by Pac-Man's tonsils. Now they have their fortifications. Okay, so let's go over to the teeth. I told you the teeth are jutting out the bottom of Pac-Man's jaw. These are the 2 bottom peninsula fortifications. The Ottomans bring their cannons and their troops over land, and they start doing the same thing to these peninsulas they started doing to Fort St. Elmo, digging in, trenches, cannons, and they start bombarding the place. The Ottomans now, I'm not going to say desperate at all, but they're looking at the clock. And this is going to be important for our purposes here. It's not just food and water that's presenting problems for them. Back in the day, we don't think about this as much now, but sea travel back in the day, well, the day of sail, the day of the oar, was very, very seasonal. When the weather got bad in the Mediterranean, when it got cold, when winter came, the winds were not right. The waves were not right. You couldn't just hop on the water anytime you wanted to hop on the water and just go sail wherever you wanted. It didn't work that way. Yeah, the siege started in the summer. It's closing in on fall. Because of this, the Ottomans have to take some chances they probably wouldn't otherwise take. They bring the boats in, and they decide they're going to try something. The troops that are underneath the teeth, they're going to try to throw them at the walls, while at the same time doing a landing using the boats, doing an amphibious landing using the boats by the back tooth, essentially, by the back tooth. They try it. They think things are going well. Things would have been going well, but there was something they didn't quite plan on. The boats, the knights, like I said, they had been making preparations. Part of those preparations were they had been putting up underwater spikes and stakes in anticipation of the Ottomans coming to do it, coming to do exactly what they were going to do. The boats can't get all the way to the beach. They stall out in the water. Now you're unloading your troops, and they're wading in under fire, and they're dying in droves. They're dying in the water. They're dying on the beaches. Honestly, they need to make a movie about this. I really hope the rumors are true that Mel Gibson's making a miniseries about this. They are dying. Well, now the Ottomans try to press the issue, and they decide they're going to try to sail their boats around the back tooth, around the tip of it. They're looking and they're thinking, well, their cannons aren't going to get to us. The knights had prepared for that too. They had at sea level cannons the Ottomans didn't know about. They start to sail the ships around the tooth, and lo and behold, there are night cannons waiting for them like a rabbit jumping right into the mouth of a hungry lion. These cannons start smoking the Ottoman ships right out of the water. And remember, reinforcements aren't coming for the Ottomans. As the ships are going down, the troops on the ships are going down with them, and your forces are being depleted, and they're being depleted rapidly. Okay, now I know you're thinking, all is gravy. Looks like the Knights have it. Not at all. This has been a tale of a lot of hardship for the Ottomans, but remember, the Knights only have so much food too. Only have so much ammunition for their rifles, for their cannons. They only have so much water too. Yes, they had tried to provision themselves and they had done very well, but they are in a real pickle. And those Ottoman cannons are still falling, and the Knights' walls are dropping. They are dropping, and they are dropping rapidly. And if the Ottomans get through the walls, well, that's it. The Ottomans start throwing themselves crazily at the walls, and now they're digging a tunnel underneath them. Like I said, the Ottomans are great at this. The Knights, they don't figure out that the Ottomans have tunneled completely underneath their walls until it's almost too late. But they eventually do figure it out. What do? There's really only one thing you can do in that situation. You have to dig down inside of your city. Remember, this is all by hand. And you have to dig a counter tunnel looking for their tunnel under the ground. Ancient technology. They find them. They meet under the walls of the Knights in the dark with muskets and swords and spears, and they have a nasty hand-to-hand combat war in the pitch black. Yeah, people have died in terrible, scary ways, right? A nasty hand-to-hand combat war takes place in the tunnels, and the Knights prevail. The Knights prevail. They cave the whole thing in. Now the Ottomans have no choice but to throw themselves against the walls. Now, many people to this day, they believe that God stepped in repeatedly at different times to save the Knights. Maybe you are skeptical of that. Maybe you believe that. What happens next is one of the main justifications people will use to say, oh my gosh, God saved them. He saved them. The Ottomans are trying to attack from the sea and the land. Jewish producer Chris was unclear on that, so I'm worried I haven't been clear on that. It is mainly a land attack on the peninsulas. They're under the teeth. That's where all the bombardment's coming. That's where the trenches are coming. They're just trying to mix in as much of the ocean as they can while they have the boats. And the Knights are crumbling. I shouldn't say the Knights are crumbling. That's probably not fair. The walls are crumbling. They're running out of men. They're running out of food. They're running out of walls. They are hopelessly outnumbered still, even though they've killed legions of these Ottomans. And the Ottomans are smashing the walls, and the Ottomans can taste victory. Pause on that. Remember, I told you there were 4 locations. Pac-Man's nose, Pac-Man's 2 teeth, and then Mdina. Pac-Man's tonsils. It's not necessarily exactly there, but you get what I'm saying. It's inland a little bit. Mdina. Well, Mdina is aware, they have a very, very tiny force there, Mdina is aware that the 2 teeth are in dire straits. And if those fortifications fall, it's over. The island will be taken. It's over. So they decide to send out a reconnaissance unit. Not a big unit, not a massive force. They're just going out to sniff around. Where are the Ottoman forces? What's the camp look like? Let's try to get word to this or that. Before I get to any of that, I do have to clarify how much hatred there is between these sides, because this part is important. Remember, I told you that Fort St. Elmo fell. Remember, I told you that earlier, many, many years earlier, when Rhodes fell, Suleiman the Magnificent had let the knights go, and he was angry that they were now fighting him. When Fort St. Elmo fell, the Ottomans took the few knights who were left alive. They chopped off their heads. They disemboweled them, desecrating the corpses. Then, as an insult to Christianity, they nailed them to crosses without heads and without guts, and then they floated them across the water back to the other forts. This is a military order. What's that feel like if you're standing on the fort and you see the headless, gutless corpse of your friend with a little religious insult on top of it floating at you? Yeah, the knights didn't take it well. How not well did they take it? They took all the Ottoman prisoners they had, or a bunch of them. I heard all and I heard a bunch. I don't know which is true. And they chopped their heads off, and they loaded their heads into the knights' cannons, and they started firing the heads of the captured Ottoman prisoners back towards the Ottoman lines. This is the degree of hatred we're dealing with, and I saved that little story so you can understand what is at stake as the Ottomans are now knocking down the walls of what are essentially the last two fortifications. You with me? This is hand to hand. Dave Alette, who is the leader, is not hiding out in his command post. He is crossing swords with Ottomans on the walls, bloody, nasty, screaming, horrible, hand to hand cannons. It's as bad as you can imagine. Back to Mdina, back to the recon force. This force rides out just sniffing around. And by God's providence, by accident, I don't know what you want to say. I wasn't there, and I haven't asked God about it. They come across a gold mine. They come across the relatively undefended Ottoman camp. The camp where the cooks are, where the wounded are being treated, where all their supplies are. The recon unit, by accident, stumbles into the Ottoman camp, and they promptly start slaughtering everyone in the camp and then burning everything down on fire. Remember, at this exact moment, the Ottomans are plowing through the walls, getting ready to win the entire island. They turn around and their camp is on fire. They freak out, call out the attack, which you would, and go charging back toward the camp. This is happening in the matter of an hour. People say minutes. It depends on what you believe. Minutes away from Malta falling. They ride back towards the camp. The recon unit gets out. It is a horrible, horrible thing. The Ottomans now, they're probably completely defeated. They've lost another 4,000 to 6,000, but they don't feel like they can just quit. They have to try something else, anything else. So they ride towards Mdina, Pac-Man's tonsils. Mdina is, to say lightly defended would be putting it mildly. There's almost no one there. They have almost no cannonballs. So they take everyone they do have, including defenseless civilians. They stand them on the walls and dress them up like soldiers. And then they take the few cannonballs they have and they shoot them at the Ottoman force when the Ottomans are out of range. Why? They want the Ottomans to think they're loaded with cannonballs. We have so many, we'll shoot them at you before you even get close enough. The Ottomans, by now, their spirit is broken. They get shot at from out of range. They see all these air fingers, quote, troops on top of Mdina, and they say, screw this. We're leaving. They start marching back towards the other two teeth. So the Ottomans have now broken. They're just not there anymore. They don't have the forces they need. They don't have the food they need. They're ravaged by disease and hunger. Things have gone poorly on Malta. And then things get from bad to worse. Remember, the knights were constantly sending out letters. Help, 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 send help. We need help. Please, send help. Send it. Why are you not sending any help? Finally, after all this brutality, and the island could have fallen a month ago, but after they fought like lions, 8,000 troops land. Fresh forces, relief troops. The Ottomans recognize that this is a disaster for them if they don't put a stop to these troops immediately. So they gather up what they have, and they launch an attack at the 8,000 troops. By now, the Ottomans, like I said, they're not what they were. They don't have the manpower. The Janissaries are basically all dead. They're just in terrible shape. And the 8,000 troops, remember, are fresh. They haven't been part of a siege. They are well fed. They are well rested. Their weapons are in good working order. And not only that, they have the high ground. The Ottomans launch an attack at them and do virtually nothing. They shatter against the lines of the 8,000 person relief force. This is it. The Ottomans officially break, and they take off towards the boats. They are running towards their boats to escape so fast that the knights come out. Everybody comes out and starts attacking them as they escape. They are attacking them so quickly as they escape and slaughtering them that the Ottoman commander by this time, Pasha is his name, doesn't matter. The Ottoman commander at this time has to rally his troops and fight shoulder to shoulder with them to keep his entire force from being wiped out, trying to buy them time as they get on the boats and sail away. And Malta is saved. It is one of the great, great history tales of all time. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope maybe you learned a little something from it. But yeah, that is the Siege of Malta.